Hey everyone, it's Joe. I'm the Kosher Ninja, and we've been chatting about my adventure last year hiking on the Shvil Israel, or Israel National Trail. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so glad you've stopped by, and while you're here, go check out my videos from the Shvil, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when I post new videos. But right now, we're talking H2O. Last time we talked about the importance of knowing your body and your water needs. And today we're going to talk about how to meet those needs most efficiently. First of all, the foreigners among you need to know that Israeli tap water is perfectly fine to drink. And there's going to be many places where your water refill is a sketchy looking faucet or more rarely a spring. Don't worry. They're fine. I've drunk straight from a spring before in En-Gedi and I was fine. This time, the only spring that I thought of using was probably fine, but there were these little tiny fishies swimming in it, so I took a pass. But in general, if it's identified in the Red Book or otherwise marked as potable, which might be in Hebrew actually, but you'll be fine. However, don't pack a water filter thinking you can source your water in nature and filter it, because you can't. And it's just going to be a waste of precious pack weight. So with that in mind, we've already mentioned that in the desert you're going to have to arrange for water caches, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in the north, you have access to places where you can refill water along the way or where you can buy bottled water. Even then, you have to plan ahead so that you don't carry water for the whole day if there's a refill halfway through. At the same time, you can't always count on those refills because, like what happened to me and my Israeli buddy on day 5, you might not be able to find it. So it's really important to have a good water strategy. Never carry unnecessary water, but always make sure you have enough. Some people do this by cameling up. The theory is that you drink as much water as you can before you leave camp in the morning, and then you don't have to carry it because it's in you. I tried this once. Bad idea. Some people swear by it, others say it's a wash. For me, I drank a liter before I left Bladder in the desert one morning. Entirely apart from what we said about water intoxication last time, for the next hour, I had to stop literally every 10 minutes to pee. Not so bad maybe if I was a guy, right? But I'm not. Every single time I had to pee was a military scale operation to stake out a suitable location, undo a half dozen straps, take my pack off, find my toilet kit, and undo my pants to squat, then redo my pants, pack away my toilet kit, hoist my pack back on my back, and readjust a half dozen straps. And if that's not enough, it was the desert. There were no trees or bushes to hide behind, not even rocks in this particular place. There were probably a dozen busloads of high school students in the area. You get the idea. There's a much better way to manage your water strategy than cameling up. Not to mention, just like my Israeli buddy's 6 liters of water on day 5, that liter that I drank was wasted in the desert rather than in my body hydrating me. The most important thing to keep in mind is that if you've planned it right, there's always going to be water at your destination, so where you're going to camp or stay the night. This means when you leave in the morning, only take the water that you need while you're actually hiking, plus a reasonable emergency supply in case you get lost or run into other trouble along the way. Then when you get to camp or to a trail angel, you'll have all the water you need for cooking and brushing your teeth waiting for you. If you're in the desert, the first thing you need to do when you get into camp is to find your water cache. Then, before you do anything else, refill the next day's hiking needs out of your cache, and that way you know how much water you have available for use around camp. Don't do like I did. I would leave in the morning with all that day's water per the Red Book, and then I'd have 2 to 3 liters left over or more when I got into camp, where I'd either have an endless faucet or in the desert a 6-liter cache. And then the next day I'd have another 6 liters to carry on my back. Of course, you could always leave the extra for the next hiker who comes along and maybe doesn't have enough. But I didn't really clue into that until it was basically too late. But I can't emphasize it enough. Keep your camp water in camp and your hiking water on your back. The Red Book recommendation combines both, which means if you leave camp with the recommended amount, you're carrying too much. I mentioned last time that I made the mistake of not keeping track of my water supply. This is critical. But how do you do that? Well, first you start with a strategic supply of water bottles, and a couple of smart water bottles aren't going to cut it here. I had a 2-liter platypus bladder in my pack and a collection of different sized collapsible bottles organized either in my pack or within sight in the side pockets of my pack. This gave me a completely unnecessary total of 5 to 6 liters that I then felt compelled to carry because I was scared, and since I had the bottles, so why not, right? Well, 5 to 6 kilos is why not. I had the right idea with the different sized bottles, but I failed to capitalize on it by 1, using them strategically to adjust for my different water needs each day, and 2, keeping track of my water supply. Instead, like I said a moment ago, I left camp every day with at least 5 liters of water, whether I would need it on the trail or not. And I also thought I'd track my water supply by drinking the visible random bottles first, because I figured the bladder was easier to carry and that way I could see how much I had drunk. True. But aside from the water intoxication thing we talked about, you don't really need to know how much water you've drunk. You need to know how much you have left. And I never knew that, because to know, I would have to take my pack off and open it to check the bladder. The unexpected downside to this was that I was afraid to drink. Also because I didn't want to have to stop and pee because of that whole military operation thing. And I'd end up arriving in camp with a mostly full bladder in my pack and a couple of random bottles left over for a total of, like I said, 2 to 3 extra kilos or more that I had carried for absolutely no reason. So this hadn't occurred to me, but it's a trick I learned from my buddy on day 5. He recommended drinking the bladder first, then either drinking the awkward bottles or using them to refill the bladder when I take my midday break, and keeping 1 of the smaller bottles as a dedicated emergency stash. I wish I could say this changed my life. And it did, partly, but I still continued to leave camp every morning with 5 to 6 liters. But at least after that, I never had to open my pack to check the bladder to know how much water I had left. If the bladder wasn't empty, I knew I had at least whatever was left in the bladder and whatever was left in the emergency bottles and the random bottles. Plus, the bladder was hands-free, so it was easier to drink from than the random bottles. Of course, refilling the bladder without getting everything wet and wasting a lot of water was a challenge at first, but I quickly developed a system. Another important thing that I knew going in, but really learned in practice very quickly, was that water is not enough. Like we discussed last time, you also need electrolytes. So very quickly, I learned that in addition to my half-liter emergency stash, I kept a smaller bottle that served as my electrolyte bottle. It had about 300 milliliters of water in it. And in the afternoon, when I started to feel like I was struggling, I would add half a tab of electrolytes to the bottle, and I felt like a new woman. Now, we still have to talk about water in the desert, which is a special case. In the desert, there are no water sources along the Shvil, with the exception of a few spots where there's something like a kibbutz or a restaurant or maybe a gas station, usually about a kilometer or two off trail. As a result, you need to prepare your water caches at strategic intervals. This is important. Make sure your caches are at your night camps. I've seen people cache water at places where they don't plan to camp. And then what ends up happening is you suddenly have to carry your whole cache in addition to your load. Remember that part about not carrying your in-camp water needs? As for how to cache, you can make your own caches, as I had originally thought I would, but it's not recommended. The water caching services are excellent, and yes, they do cost some money, but so will doing it yourself, and the convenience and peace of mind are well worth it. Also, there are changes taking place all the time, and the service providers can advise you where you'll need water and, for example, where new water tanks have been installed so you don't actually need a cache, and other little tidbits like that. They'll provide instructions for finding the cache, and following the videos and directions they provide will take a little bit of getting used to, but you'll figure it out. Just make sure that you leave yourself enough time when you arrive in camp. There are several service providers, and some provide different coverage than others, so do your research and get recommendations. Also, when you're placing your order, make sure that they provide a guarantee, but I think most of them do. Another thing is you shouldn't really place your order too far in advance. As long as you do your research so you know how the system works and who to call, don't worry about locking it in until you get on the Shvil. Of course, if you're starting in the south, then you have to get it organized before you set out from Eilat. But if you're coming from the north, you can even place your order while you take a 0 day or two in Arad before heading into the desert. One last thing. Not planning your water properly, especially in the desert, can kill you. But so can flash floods. It may not be raining where you are, but rains further away can collect and cause a flash flood where you least expect it. The danger is not just of drowning, but a dry wadi can turn into a roiling cauldron of rocks, branches, and other debris and projectiles in the blink of an eye. So especially when you're in the desert, make sure you stay informed of the weather forecast for the area and beyond, and of any actual flash flood alerts. Follow the Red Book guidance for areas to avoid hiking through when flash floods are possible, and never camp on low ground. Most of the night camps are safe, but there are some where you just need to be careful that you haven't pitched your sleeping bag in the path of an instant river. To recap, make sure you're fit enough to carry all the water you need and that the rest of your pack is not too heavy to handle your water needs. Carry enough water, but only what you need for the day's hiking, and supply your in-camp needs in camp. Use a strategic collection of bottles to manage your water supply and make sure you get enough electrolytes. Research and plan your water for the desert, and don't get washed away by a flash flood. So are you planning for the Shvil or for another trail? Did this video help you plan your water strategy, or do you still have other questions? Tell me about all that in the comments section down below. If you've liked this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe, ring the bell, and share with your friends. Also, if you've hiked the Shvil Israel and have anything helpful to add, please put that in the comments down below. And I'd just love to hear from you. I'm so excited that we get to share our journeys in this way, and I can't wait to see you again next time. Until then, thanks for watching, and shalom, eh?